So here's the question. How did 43 Senate Democrats end up forcing a government shutdown over demands that conservative leaders are calling basically a $1.5 trillion ransom note? Welcome to the deep dive. It is October 1st, 2025. And as the clock hit midnight, the federal government officially entered a shutdown. Now, this isn't just another missed deadline. The sources we've been looking at argue there's something, well, different about this specific crisis, the context and the demands being made. You had a simple funding extension, a clean continuing resolution, or CR, passed by the House, sent over to the Senate. The idea was just keep the government funded at current levels, FY 2025 levels, until November 21st. Avoid disruption, right? But that bill got blocked. 43 Senate Democrats voted no. And the immediate effect: essential personnel, federal law enforcement, air traffic controllers, even active duty military, they have to work, but they won't get paid. So today we're doing our deep dive into the sources you brought, trying to understand the political demands driving this crisis and really who's bearing the brunt of it.
Exactly. And what's really crucial, according to these conservative sources, is that the fight isn't actually about the established funding levels themselves. The analysis points to this being fundamentally Democrats refusing to fund the government unless Republicans roll back policy wins from the last election cycle. And on top of that, fund brand new policy priorities, essentially using the shutdown as leverage to, well, undo things already enacted.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics first. This clean CR. The Republican position, backed by President Trump, groups like Heritage Action, was just past this simple extension. What's the benefit of doing that?
Well, the argument is that passing a clean CR, just this short-term funding at existing levels, buys Congress time to get back to what's called regular order. And for you listening, that just means debating and passing the 12 detailed individual spending bills. That's where the policy debates, the cuts, the increases are supposed to happen, not, crammed into one temporary must-pass bill.
Right. And the sources we have highlight what they call a major hypocrisy here.
Yeah.
What's the history with Democrats and these kinds of short-term measures?
Yeah, it's a pretty stark contrast they draw. This exact type of continuing resolution, the one blocked by 43 Democrats, it's described in the material as, quote, strikingly similar to CRs they voted for at least 13 times under the previous administration. So the conservative argument is, look, the tool itself, the clean CR, wasn't the problem before. They're saying it's being rejected now because the minority party sees an opening to force policy changes outside of that regular appropriations process. There are even notes here pointing out that Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer himself used to condemn blocking these simple CRs, called it reckless partisan posturing back then.
Okay, so if they rejected the clean bill, what was the price? What were the demands? You mentioned Tiffany Justice from Heritage Action calling it taking the people's government ransom. How do these groups get to that $1.5 trillion figure? That sounds enormous for a short-term patch.
It is enormous, and that's the core of the conservative complaint. That $1.5 trillion figure, according to the sources, is the combined price tag. It represents the total cost of all the policy reversals and the new spending priorities Democrats insisted had to be attached to this short-term funding bill. It wasn't just about keeping the lights on. They were demanding this huge supplemental spending package tacked on, full of controversial items.
And these demands, they weren't just about dollars and cents, were they? The Republican sources say they involved rolling back specific policies conservatives had recently enacted. Like, what was the healthcare flashpoint?
Right. A big one cited is a demand to bring back taxpayer funding for health care for illegal immigrants. That funding had been specifically cut in what the GOP calls their One Big Beautiful Bill. So that's a direct policy reversal. And beyond that, demands for making the expanded Obamacare subsidies permanent, something Republicans see as, well, major federal overspending.
And then there's the category Republicans label woke spending. What falls under that, according to these sources?
The materials point to demands to restore billions for certain climate initiatives and diversity programs. Republicans categorize that money as funding Green New Deal scams and various DEI initiatives, things they actively campaigned against.
Okay.
Then you get into the really divisive social issues. The demands reportedly included restoring taxpayer funding for abortion services and also taxpayer money for sex change procedures, highly contentious policy areas.
And I also saw a mention of restoring media funding, something like $500 million for NPR and PBS that had been cut.
That's in there too. So when you bundle all this together, the core Republican argument, as presented in these sources, is that Democrats are trying to use the shutdown threat to just nullify the 2024 election results and policy wins. They're insisting, look, if you want to debate these major policies, fine, but do it through the proper channels, not by holding the basic functioning of government hostage.
And while these negotiations stall, the impact is immediate. Let's shift to the human cost here. The frontline workers who don't get paid, Active duty military have to show up, but paychecks stop? The NRSC put it bluntly, Senate Democrats just forced our troops to go without pay.
And the ripple effect on public safety is serious. Think about federal law enforcement, TSA agents, Customs and Border Protection, FBI agents. They're deemed essential, legally required to work, but without pay. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association warned this causes huge financial stress. They called it a dangerous distraction for people in really critical jobs. And another key point, when support staff are furloughed, these officers get pulled from their main duties, pulled away from things like, disrupting criminal networks to do administrative tasks instead. That's a direct hit to enforcement.
And the situation in federal prisons sounds particularly bad. The Bureau of Prisons can't just close. According to the sources, officers are already dealing with dangerous understaffing, forcing them to work without pay. It just makes experienced officers quit faster.
Exactly. And the material explicitly states this added stress directly increases the risk of violence inside those facilities. That's a major public safety concern, not just inside the prisons, but potentially outside too.
And you got the veterans. How are they affected?
It's a significant impact. While their main VA medical care usually continues, and pre-approved benefits like pensions keep flowing because they're funded differently, the shutdown immediately stops other vital functions. Processing new disability claims, handling appeals, making benefits decisions, all that grinds to a halt. So veterans needing help or decisions on their earned support, they just have to wait longer. Even things like community programs that help homeless veterans can face funding delays, creating instability for vulnerable populations.
And zooming out to the wider economy, this kind of political brinkmanship, it does real damage, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The sources cite estimates calling this a wholly preventable blow, particularly to the travel economy. The cost. Maybe $1 billion each week the government is shut.
$1 billion a week.
Wow. Yeah. And here's a crucial distinction. Furloughed federal workers usually get back pay eventually. But defense contractors, small businesses that depend on government contracts, they are not guaranteed compensation if they have to lay people off because the funding stops. This can permanently damage the specialized defense industrial base. Remember the 2018-2019 shutdown? We permanently lost about $3 billion from the GDP because of that. It's real economic loss.
So the picture painted by these sources is really one of Congress stuck in a, quote, broken cycle. Political fights over temporary funding bills that end up hurting essential services, the economy, the troops.
It's a recurring problem, and the sources note that Congress has basically failed to pass all its annual spending bills on time almost every single year since the Clinton administration. It's become the norm, unfortunately.
A historical context is telling. But let's connect this specific fight, this shutdown drama, to the bigger fiscal picture for everyone listening. What are we maybe not focusing on because of this?
Right, and this might be the most critical point from a fiscal perspective in these sources. This entire battle, the clean CR, the $1.5 trillion in demands, the shutdown itself, it's all happening over the discretionary part of the budget. That discretionary spending, it accounts for less than 1/3 of all federal spending, less than 1/3.
Okay, so what's the other 2/3?
That's the mandatory spending. Things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt. It's essentially on autopilot. It flows out automatically based on existing law, regardless of this current CR fight. And that spending, the autopilot part, is what's driving a projected $2 trillion deficit this year. So all this high-stakes political theater, the stuff stopping military paychecks, it's focused on a relatively small slice of the pie. It distracts, the sources argue, from the enormous, unsustainable trajectory of that mandatory spending, which keeps growing the national debt, completely untouched by this particular debate.
That really puts it in perspective. A massive fight over essentially a fraction of the budget, while the vast majority of spending just continues unchecked, fueling enormous deficits. It really makes you think, what would it actually take? What kind of political pressure would be needed to force Congress to grapple with the entire budget, the whole fiscal picture, instead of just repeating this drama over the smaller discretionary part? Something to consider as we see how this current crisis unfolds. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.